if we did a good job here, we're changing the way real estate works forever. This is the foundation. If we get this right, the entire industry is going to be built on this for many, many years to come. Houses will be cheaper one day. Commercial transactions will be more seamless, less friction, less cost, right? That's societal differences that are fundamental. Those things get me excited.
If I cannot make a good decision, right, for myself or for my business with the amount of data I'm able to play with these days, like, what am I even doing?
It's not a secret that most large asset managers couldn't close a quarter if their life depended on it. Not because they're dumb, not because they're not investing ridiculous money, because it's just really, really hard to do.
Every business and every person within a business does things a little bit differently. There are probably 3,000, right, subtasks involved in that 2-hour, right, bit of analysis and production of a product that you're talking about. And the reason why your expectations of AI are up here, and in some cases its performance is down here, is because it's just being told the one task that you just described.
The overarching theme is always, we want all our data in one place so we can do everything. I can do a risk review on all my properties instead of just a handful select, right? I can ask any question I want, about risk, about exposure, about opportunity. I can build strategies and think about how they might affect things. I can do a lot of what if scenarios and, kind of war games. We'll see all that in the near future.
All right. We are here for another episode of Bricks, Bytes, and Bold Moves, the future of real estate. I'm Dr. Kate Jarvis, the CEO and co-founder of Fifth Dimension, and I'm here today with the CEO and co-founder of Cherre, LD, and we're super excited to be talking with you because I've got to be honest, I meet a lot of prop tech companies on the circuit. We go to the same conferences, we share customers, and good and bad things get said about those businesses and about the software. And I've heard almost universally good things about Cherre. And so when I think of some of the best, I think of your business and I think of the journey that you've been on. And when I think that, I mean not just raised a lot of capital, that's great, been around for a while, but really the customer value delivery. People love you guys. So congratulations, first of all, on the amazing thing that you have built. And I'd love to hear more about that journey that you've been on. I know also that you're a serial entrepreneur. You got the bug early, it seems, and have done various things along the way. You've been in financial services. I'm interested in how you fell in love with real estate and what you think the future of real estate and technology is.
Yeah, it's funny. I think I'm at this point like a chief take credit for other people's work officer. I get to take credit for all the team's hard work, so it's great. So thank you for that honor. It's really the team who deserves all of that for all the hard work that they have. Our journey was always, I think, a little strange in that sense. So my co-founder and I have always been very dissatisfied people, I think, for lack of a better term. And I think dissatisfied people make good founders because we look at the world and are either upset, angry, frustrated, and we're also obsessed because, a normal person will say, oh, that's really annoying and just walk on, right? Except we just can't let it go, right? It's an unhealthy obsession, like a really, unhealthy obsession. And we'll look at something and say, well, how do we dive into that? How do we make it more interesting for us? Real estate was not the first thing we worked on. We worked at a company back when we were 13. We started a company in the IT services space and, way before, internet was really cool, but in our world, it was really cool. We got to build websites for some really good companies. We got to do IT services for some really great companies, and we ended up, selling that company and doing really well. The second company we worked on was also kind of by accident. Ben had built this really great platform for a buddy of ours in the HR data space, helping recruiting companies be more efficient, especially in an industry that's very highly regulated, like the railroad industry or, airports, things like that, where it's really important to know which type of employee is in what certain place, right? What type of certifications do they have? They have to get there on time because, the margins are so thin that if you kind of just 5-10 minutes late, you miss the entire margin on that employee. And Ben built this really great software to do that. But then very quickly, they understood that they had something a lot more special than their internal software. And, we spun that off and that company sold to Bullhorn, which is the large HR data company or software company, I should say. We then started another company in the private equity data space, thinking about how late stage pre-IPO companies, well, today it's almost obvious to say it, but at the time it wasn't so obvious, really look like public companies. There's enough information out there to look at them and trade them, quote unquote, in a way that more resembles public equity trading. And we thought, can we build this engine that sucks in all this information that's out there and available around company filings and employees and IP and trying to get a sense of is this company going to go public? And if this company goes public soon, at what valuation, right? And can we get an opportunity there? And that became a very successful company that we spun out of Knight Capital, and we sold that to Oppenheimer. We're in private equity there for a few years. We called it Private Shares Group. And the idea for real estate existed actually before that. We looked at this industry excited, but also sober. And the sobriety part overwhelmed us, right? I think it's important when you look at a new industry, especially for founders, because our first instinct when we look at a new industry is to be irreverent, which is good, right? You can't fix things if you just accept the status quo. But irreverence is also kind of dangerous, right? Because you look at industry and think, oh, these people are all stupid, I'm going to fix it, right? And that clearly you're an idiot if you think that way. So we knew that if that was our feeling, we're missing something. And what we were missing is it's clear it's not a stupid industry. These are people who are actually very smart. They had to work in an environment where they didn't have all the tools available, which means that those that were successful were either ridiculously lucky, some are that, or ridiculously smart. And we looked at that industry and realized, okay, what is the structural reason that it looks the way it looks? And it was, well, everything's just siloed. The industry didn't go through the same type of evolution that other industries went through, right? So, late 90s, just before the dot-com boom, a lot of investment went into software. Real estate, we're a little slower, right? It's a more risk-averse industry. We don't have budgets, right? There's no line item in a building which says investment in R&D, right? So we were kind of a step behind as an industry. And then the dot-com boom, and also we feel vindicated, right? Oh, good thing we didn't invest in that nonsense, right? And then 2001, we have 9/11, and that decimates the real estate industry's epicenter here in New York. And we take a little pause, and we have a recession for a couple of years. Then a couple investments, some of the companies we know today actually came right out in that little window. And then we have, again, another recession, 08, 9, 10, right? Coming into the global recession. Then almost all the companies that we think about today as kind of the more successful stories come out around 2011, 12, 13. That's when they all start. And then obviously that wave kind of continues, I guess, still today. And when we, looked at that industry again, after we had sold to Oppenheimer, we started saying, well, maybe it is the right time. Maybe at this point there's enough capital out there to support what we knew it was going to cost about $100 million to build this business. So maybe there's enough capital at this point to actually build this. Maybe the technology is actually ripe to be able to support what we wanted to do. And it's really hard to do this. So, we weren't sure if we were going to be able to do it at the time, but maybe technology is there to support it. And maybe the industry itself is ready to actually listen, because at least in the beginning, it wasn't obvious that they wanted to hear this message, right? We were talking to people who, have been very successful, and they develop sort of this God complex, some of it justified because they've been really, really successful in a very tough industry. But very often the answer is it's not always justified. They know when they're right, but they don't really know why they're right, and they don't know when they're wrong.
Wouldn't they prefer to stay that way sometimes?
Sometimes. I think sometimes I like to give them the benefit of the doubt that they're just skeptical, right? And that if you show value, they'll get excited. But most people will say they show value, and it's very hard to show value. And I think, I used to say, just allergic to bullshit. There's just an industry that's fundamentally allergic to bullshit. And we've been sold a lot of bullshit over the years. And I think there's that kind of aversion. And when we started the company, I think we said the industry is finally ready for that. And we were wrong. And it took years before the industry was ready for what we had already launched. I think the big breakthrough we had was actually COVID. Ironic. But it gave us the opportunity for the first time to have conversations with clients where they said, I don't know. And they never said that before, right? Up until that point, they were gods. And all of a sudden they said, well, I'm just not sure. We're in a new market we've never been before, and we don't know anything about it. Or we're dealing with a situation we've never seen before. And it gave them permission to ask those questions and be vulnerable. And I think that was our real breakthrough.
That's really interesting that the inciting event was something that was an economic downturn, right? Something that panicked a lot of people. But as you say, that makes people go back to the data and ask different questions. So if you're in the business of scenario modeling and of cash flow projections, et cetera, as many people in real estate are, they might need new data sources, they might need new questions to ask, and they might need new ways of thinking about what to do next. And I think those moments of humility are good for us all in a way. I'm interested in nowadays with people having various opinions on what's happening with commercial real estate and boom and bust, whether you think that is only increasing the potential for Cherre to grow. How do you inoculate yourself to those cycles?
I don't know if we've really been affected by cycles. I think once we hit that wave, it's been don't want to say smooth sailing, it's nothing smooth sailing, but it's been pretty good. I think at this point, especially with the advent of AI and kind of, or Gen AI, I should say, it's pretty obvious to all of our clients that, data is the fundamental for all, the foundation for everything they do in the future. And maybe up until now, maybe you could, afford to say, well, we don't have a data strategy, or we're not thinking about that. It's not a high priority. That's not the case today. All of our clients either have a data, or even not client prospects, either have a data strategy, are working on a data strategy, don't have one, but feel ashamed that they don't have one yet and are trying to figure out and scramble. I think that's the reality of where we are today. And I don't think that's going to change. And I think it's accelerated a lot of our adoption. It's also put a spotlight on a lot of things. So places where maybe we were okay before and not perfect now have to be perfect as well, right? So it's also forced us to harden a lot of parts, different parts of our process and different parts of our platform to make sure that, they're able to deliver those types of capabilities to our clients. I think that's going to continue. I think we're going to see more and more demands from our clients to give them more things that, to them feel like obvious extensions, but of course to us means a lot of hard work to get to where we need to be. And I think we're also going through a process just as a company of, the evolution of, a company that the first few years, first few million, and you cross that 10 million and company on its way to 100 million is a very different story, right? Mm-hmm. And you go through different structural changes as a company, right? Who do you need to hire? How do you build kind of that VP layer of management, right? So we're at the same time going through, fundamental industry changes around, the industry being ready for this next step of what AI is coming. And then us as a company, right? Just maturing and growing in ways that are new for us, especially as a management team. So we're doing these things at the same time. It's been a pretty fun journey though.
Yeah, it's interesting and refreshing to hear that there's something wrong with you being obsessed with being an entrepreneur. I think people idolize entrepreneurs a lot, but in order to do it successfully, you do have to have an unhealthy obsession that can affect various aspects of your life. And I would say reinvent my job as CEO, as you mentioned, in periods of growth every 3 months. I tell most of my friends that, and you're like, why would you do that sort of thing? Like, I would prefer a job that at least 80%, right, of the JD is sort of set. And we've recently been doing a geographic expansion ourselves, hiring more team members in the US. And suddenly I'm hiring people who have 20 more plus years domain expertise in something than I do. And I'm like, who lets me do this? Like, why am I the person that's now supposed to be evaluating your place in my business and whether or not this is the right hire? And so I think that is a really interesting place to be. And you're trying to reconcile, as you say, those different changes and transformations with an industry that I think is changing increasingly rapidly. So how do you think about marrying, for example, your product vision? How strong and solid are you on what you want out of the next 5 years from Cherre, and then integrating that cycle of customer feedback?
I'm unwavering on the product vision, and I don't think I ever will waver on it. We're still following my drawings from 2018. Shockingly, Kevin Matthijs, our head of product, loves to tell the story. I don't know if it makes me look good, but I literally dropped it on his desk when we hired him and said, this is kind of my year plan. And we're still working on it since 2018, and we're not done yet. So I think we have quite a while to go. I think it's probably one of my challenges where I'm always over-ambitious, over-optimistic. I don't know which one of those is true. Probably both of them. But it's not going to stop. So I'm going to continue along that path. And I know that product is what the market wants, right? And every step along the way, we hear more and more from the market. That's what they want. When we first spoke about AI, our deck said AI for real estate 2018. And I know it sounds funny to say that in retrospect, but we understood that, you first have to start the ticker, in the old 2 Sigma adage, and only then can you start building models on top of that. We knew that was the future, and we knew that we'd have to build the infrastructure underneath to make that possible, right? You can't have a renaissance without the Bloomberg, right? And, I don't think we're a Bloomberg, right? I don't think it's the right analogy, but we're the infrastructure piece. And without that infrastructure piece, nobody can build that. We had a guest speaker yesterday actually described us kind of the AWS for real estate. I think that's very much true in many ways. And we knew we had to build that infrastructure for the future to work. And there are parts of that infrastructure that we just haven't built yet. And we're going to keep working on those different elements such that whether it's a real estate asset manager, fund manager, property manager, bank, insurance company, as an end user using those building blocks to build business solutions, or it's a technology firm that needs to use those same building blocks to create some type of solution for their end clients. That's our role in the world, and we're going to continue to build those pieces to solidify that role.
Interesting. I'm thinking about the parallel with large language models because, of course, those are built on a consensus of idiots on the internet. It's kind of the opposite, right? As a starting place for building a data-driven model or probabilistic model, then I think what you're aiming for, which is you walk your customers through the process of cleansing different data sources, figuring out what's integral and valuable to their business from a data standpoint, and perhaps what is less important. So how do you view the place of LLMs, perhaps verticalized LLMs, ones that are trained on real estate data, as being a part of the ecosystem that you're helping to build?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think in the near future, LLMs don't really matter in what the core of what we do. They matter on the periphery, right? Things like, parsing documents, dealing with unstructured to structured data, handling anomaly detection, things like that, generating language, right? I think about like an offering memorandum, right? Pulling the data out of the offering memorandum or creating an offering memorandum from data. Those are things that seem like pretty ubiquitous. And
music to my ears.
Yeah. And then I also think about, you said, you jokingly, it's trained on idiots. It's true to a certain extent that the internet has a lot of idiots, but I think the content of the open web is actually very intelligent content, and it allows really good training for transformers, obviously, which created really good LLMs, especially the ones that are around reasoning. I don't think I need the content to be super smart to be able to understand it. I need the content to be such that I can interpret the language, right? That's really what matters. And language seems to be a lot easier problem to solve. LLMs have become very, very good at reasoning recently, and I think there's a lot of value there. But I think that taking that and putting that into and again, also I would also add maybe, text to SQL is getting better. Maybe we'll see in the near future some capability of, we've already done some testing internally with this, to generate some type of charts and graphs and narratives out of certain structured data. But if I dropped in, all my unstructured real estate data and said, hey, LLM, go to town on that, it's incompetent. First of all, it can't handle all that data because the context window is just not large enough.
Right.
Gemini will handle 2 billion tokens, and we're not even the ballpark of what we need to handle. That wouldn't even handle one client for us, right? Not even an edge of one client, never mind the entire universe that we need to put in there. It's also the case that nothing has been trained on this, and it's not even easy to train on it, right? Because it's not enough to say this is a property. What property is? I don't know what that means, right? Is this a parcel? Is this a building? Is this an address? It's not enough to say that this is square foot. Is this square foot or net effective square foot? It's not even enough to say net effective square foot changes for Chicago and New York will measure it differently, right? I can have a different definition within the same organization, within different parts of the portfolio. So if I put any standard LM to work on that, the amount of externalities that are going to show up in that model are going to be so great that the information will essentially be junk. And unfortunately, it's not going to tell me where it's making mistakes because nothing's going to be transparent, right? It's just going to show up and that's it, right? There's nothing I'll be able to do about it. And I think that's, it's good for us, since we still have a job, right? Our job is to be able to connect and structure that data such that you can do whatever you want on top of that. But I think also, if I think about the long run of where that's headed, I think slowly we'll get to a point where we'll be able to run pretty standard LLMs on our universe in a way that provides a lot of value.
Yeah, I think your emphasis on reasoning is probably where we're focused as a business, precisely for the reason that if you cannot present back to people who want to know the historic rent per square foot from a complicated set of lease addenda, for example, you can't alter any assumptions within that conclusion, right? And I think a lot of different things, for example, about DeepSeek, it's a bad model. It's not that much better than most micro models. But what it did was capture the public imagination because it showed computers talking. It showed computers thinking. And I actually think that that is what people want, such that they can then have it much in a similar way to your product, right? Back in their hands and saying, well, in this particular local authority, what I mean is this. And now that decision is logged as a memory with that attention mechanism within that LLM. And so it becomes a lot more towards, I think, the future of an AGI or an agentic LLM, where you are telling that LLM all the time, as you would a team member, like, look, you're not a junior analyst anymore. Please don't categorize this parcel of land as industrial when it's clearly not.
Yeah, and hopefully the memory context window grows enough to they remember the training that you give them. Are you using what models are you using? O1, O3?
We have about 75 different models under the hood.
Fun.
So yeah, we're in the business of right model for the job. And we have a different copy of those models, right, for each business that we work with. But part of our IP is in our document retrieval model, which is bespoke. And even more importantly, to the point you just made, is we have a state transformer. And what that does is it allows the attention mechanism of the LLM to decide which parts of the reasoning from the previous subtask it then can reapply and re-reason, right, at the next task.
Mm.
And so rather than getting handed the number 4 of, how many R's are in strawberry, you have the entire sort of set of reasoning that's printed back to you, which makes that LLM, or maybe you're having your next version of Claude question 4.0, whatever, and say like, hey, do you think this other person in this agentic space is making the right conclusion or not? And that allows us to have a much higher reasoning accuracy and data extraction accuracy than we see in other products. But to be honest, that was a huge risk for us as a business, right? So to go back to a point that you made, we know we're going to need 100 million to build this technology. We know that we're going to need patient capital who's going to say like, I get your vision. You guys know how long it's going to take to build that, right? So I like to joke with my business partner who runs the product and technology arm of the business today. Like he does his quarterly product roadmap review and he'll bring to me and our CTO like an 18-month proposal for what he wants to build. And I'm like, this is 5 years of work, Johnny. Like, keep on trucking, buddy. But this is not,
Resonates with me, I'm afraid.
Yes. And so we love that. We love that vision. We love that clarity of thought. But I think it's difficult, especially in a space where our entire business model kind of rests on the fact that we have an augmented body of data for real estate documents and different types of transactions that are done, et cetera, that allows us to then say, oh, someone dropped a new model. Is that going to be better at thinking about reading portfolio performance reports and turning them into quality assurance reports? And we have to go through that process all the time. And as you say, that's a capital intensive play. It's a deep technology and sort of IP R&D investment. While at the same time, we have to be caring about, well, the one time you asked a question about Walt and it was calculated without the U and it should have been calculated with the U, you never want to touch our product again because now you think you can't track it.
You lose confidence. And it looks like also, at least recently, it looks like the pace of model release seems to be increasing, which is A, exciting, but also B, daunting, right? It means that every time I have to get distracted about some new shiny object that may or may not have make a difference. And I can't ignore it because if it's valuable, you want to, adopt it as fast as possible. And it's forced us to create processes that are, allow us to swap things in and out very quickly, or even for just testing purpose. But then also when you say testing, well, testing what, right? It may be good for one part of that chain, and you didn't design the chain to be completely decomposable, so maybe not, or composable, I should say. So now you have to think about that as a composable process as well. So it forces us to rethink a lot of things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really fun to have those conversations, I think, with people in real estate as well as people who are deep into data science and software, because we're building bespoke workflows. We have out of the box sort of chain of thought reasoning engines that are automating work, but every business and every person within a business does things a little bit differently. And so, okay, most asset managers start with this set of documents. They do these things to them. And before you spend hours sitting next to that person, they'll be like, oh no, I just open a few things, I put it into my Excel model and I upload it to Argus. And you're like, wait. Speak to me like a computer. There are probably 3,000, right, subtasks involved in that 2-hour, right, bit of analysis and production of a product that you're talking about. And the reason why your expectations of AI are up here, and in some cases its performance is down here, is because it's just being told the one task that you just described, right?
Yeah.
And so it creates this almost infinite body of work for the business to make sure that you're servicing each of those tiny little aspects that you would explain the first time to a junior analyst, but if they ever got it wrong again, you'd fire them.
I think what we're going to see in that space is kind of the advent of the virtual analyst. And we're already seeing the beginning of that. Yep. And I think we'll then see the virtual associate, and who knows how to review the analyst's work and check the analyst's work, because the virtual analyst will have to do, the 3,000 subtasks, whereas the virtual associate will just look at the end product and be able to answer, same way as I would spot check a model if I was an associate, right? And then we'll see the virtual VP, right? Whose job is to handle multiple tasks like this on different clients, maybe at the same time. I don't know that we see the virtual MD though, or the virtual partner, because I think that we're, unlike maybe an example of that in a different industry might be in a high frequency trading, right? Where the models are completely programmatic at this point. It's almost unthinkable, to have a human trade against models. It's like, it seems ludicrous, at least to me, to try and outperform some kind of, highly quant model. It just seems insane to me. And I think we're not going to see that in our universe for a few reasons, but not the least of which is the assets are just not homogenous, right? It's not an easy thing to trade in and out of, right? And the speed of information isn't as high. So I think we're not going to see that. And I think, that should be really encouraging to a lot of these, managing director partners in these organizations, that their job is not at risk, but also it should get them really excited, right? Because if I'm good, I'm getting superpowers, right? If I suck, I suck, right? I don't deserve to be in this business. And if I get called out, I don't have any pain for that, right? You probably need to be called out. I don't care, right? I'm not hurting those people. But I notice very quickly who is really good and who's not when you start saying, hey, you're about to get superpowers, and you see if they're getting excited or they're getting concerned, right? And I think that more often today, I'm seeing people getting excited. And that's what gets me excited as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was having an interesting conversation with Paul Tebbett at BlackRock, and he had been misquoted from a recent panel where he had been talking about essentially how they'd trained an internal version of a GPT model on previous investment committee memos, right? Very common thing to do in the industry, makes a lot of sense. You want to say if you hold a bunch of open air malls as assets in California, a new one is being proposed as an acquisition. Like, why do you normally ask these 10 questions and you didn't this time?
Yeah.
And the point he was trying to make, of course, was I want to be challenged, and I want my IC committee to challenge themselves, right? Like, I don't want to have to sit there and say, oh yeah, what was that deal we did? Like the thing, the one down the road with I want them to have that information at their fingertips. Now, of course, that got taken out of context for him, being quoted as saying, I have a voting IC member that's an AI. And he's like,
of course.
Back off. That's not what I meant even remotely. But that's exactly the energy that I like to see and get excited by in prospects and customers that we work with is imagine the possibilities, right? Because we as human beings, as you've just said about different aspects of quant trading, we can't process information at that speed. We don't have the recall. And so if we could, right, and we could query a natural language, we could make products run for us in the background. You upload new data, it automatically updates your context, right, on any new acquisition that you're thinking about. Obviously, that's really powerful. So the only reason I would say, yes, change management is difficult, but the only emotional reason to be resistant to that is that you think that your special sauce is.
I guess I just don't think that highly of myself. I probably should say agents, but I'll use a different word. I've been trading advisors, like AI advisors, for myself personally, right? So I think about every task that I do, and again, to your point, I want to be challenged, right? I don't want to go, this is good, you've done this 10 times. Thumbs up. Like that feels like a really dumb agent, right? So I'm not trying to automate a task, and in this, I'm trying to find new ideas. I want to poke holes, right? So I've kind of trained these advisors to just be assholes, right? So one of them the whole job is to look at things that I write and just poke holes in it. Not sourced well. Like the more time I give it, so it's checking sourcing, inaccurate quotes, things that don't, logical claims that don't build up or support each other. It's funny. Recently we just published a piece in PropMoto, and I don't think I've ever had just classic editor, like just work my work. And Franco just put out a few notes. I looked at yeah, why didn't the agent tell me this? Right? It should have told me that I sucked here and should have just fixed it. I went back and I said, here's the feedback I just got on this. Make sure that in the future this doesn't happen again. So I have that one, and I have another one whose job is just to give me style. Like, do I sound like another writer? Am I imitating a style, or is this my own voice, right? So I keep creating these types of things. I just write a lot. And I think that this type of environment is what we're about to see, right? Where I have a lot of agents whose job is to make me better at what I do. And they're there to it's like imagine having the best assistant, but that's perfect, right? That's challenging you, right? Imagine having the best CEO, right? Now having a pantheon of those that can help you make decisions. I'm still in the driver's seat, right? but at least now I have a lot less blind spots, and I'm being challenged on the core things that, that I have issues with, not that someone like me and, general me has it, me specifically over time. I think that's very exciting and empowering.
Yeah, I agree. I love that amount of personalization that is made possible, of course, with Gen AI. And I like the marriage of thinking about there's workflow automation over here, which is automating repetitive manual tasks, back office, front office, that opens up more mental and emotional bandwidth. Obviously, I'm selfish. I'm thinking about my job, right? You just said, how do I augment myself as a CEO? So I don't have to do any of that stuff anymore. Now, how do I, without hiring, another 10 employees, as Jeff Bezos, for example, was known, right, to be followed around just by people exclusively to challenge him. How do I recreate that environment with a kind of artificial generalized intelligence very specific to myself and my role? It's funny that you mentioned that, because one of the things that I did, I had to train myself to be a salesperson. I didn't do sales before I did this business, right? I did B2B business development in some way, which is not the same. I created in our internal product a consortia of strategic advisors who would listen to my sales pitch. And so I was like feeding it the LinkedIn profile and everything on the internet about so-and-so decision maker at Blackstone, so-and-so decision maker at Tishman Speyer. And I'd be like, so what do you think of this product? And then they would go back and forth and have a conversation about, oh, I don't think you can prove ROI. And like, who is this co-founder? I've never heard of him. They're a British company. Why would we want to buy their product in the US? And it's just so helpful for that sort of objection raising and objection handling for any type of thought work, right?
That's funny. I don't think I've ever done that. I guess sales has always come pretty naturally to me. I'm not kind of that pushy salesperson or kind of in your face. It's just, I'm just really passionate about what we do. And I think that probably comes through when I talk to clients or prospects. And I just come in almost emotional because I can't control myself. I literally can't control myself. And I'll just talk about what the product does and what we can achieve together. And I think I sweep myself and, as part of that kind of excitement. I think it just drags, prospects and clients along with me. And it comes off very authentic because it's coming from if I had to actually train myself to sell, I don't think I could. It's actually really hard, I've learned over time, to try and develop skills that are natural. I don't think I would be hired as a salesperson. And despite, still do a lot of our sales, but I don't think I could get hired as like an ordinary sales, like the discipline of waking up every morning, 50 cold calls, building a book, maintain that relationship over time for a product that I'm not that like it's not me, like connected to. I don't know that I could do it. I'd probably be pretty bad at it, right? I don't know that any of that authenticity would come through. I know that probably shouldn't tell you this about myself. It's just a very honest reflection. It's maybe that's why I've always been a founder. When it's core to what we do, it just comes out authentically, and I don't have to sell. I just have to talk about what we do, and it's just fun. I don't know that I could train myself to do this otherwise.
Yeah, I over intellectualize everything. So, that's table stakes, I think. And so I feel very similar, and I've said very similar things about being a salesperson where I will wax poetic. So why did I start this business? Setting the built world environment aside, which is very important to me. I care about reducing homelessness, other things from a personal perspective. But I believe in the very sort of cheesy woo-woo way that we need to democratize access to information, and that the only thing that has saved my life or that continues to help me grow and be who I am as a person is that I have such an absurd amount of information at my fingertips. Like, if I cannot make a good decision, right, for myself or for my business with the amount of data I'm able to play with these days, like, what am I even doing, right? I need to go back to bed. And so that I can't not think about that with getting extremely excited. But of course, I have people in my life who said, like, that's great. But also you need to scale a sales team and you need to teach other people how to do what you do. And I'm just like, I don't know, like, have them watch me do it. I don't know.
I hire people for
read
that.
books.
I am not good at that. I'm not a great mentor, I think, generally. I mean, I've always looked at really good mentors and I've never seen myself in them. If you look at me and want to just like shadow and learn, sure. But if I have to coach, I'm not really good at that, I think. I'm really good at giving direct feedback, whether people like it or not. But I'm not really good at kind of, coaching and active mentoring. I don't think I ever have been good at that. Whatever comes naturally, I feel confident in. Whatever doesn't, I don't know that I'll ever be good at that.
How do you think about that as a CEO and as your role evolves? How much do you think about growing in areas that you want to get better at? How much do you lean into your strengths? And what do you really want out of running this business for yourself?
There's this adage that, your job is just to hire good people and get out of the way. I don't believe in that. I will always be obsessed about certain parts of the business. And the second I'm not, I think that's the second I should find someone to replace me.
Hmm.
And I don't see that ever going away just because, I'm still obsessed in these things. Like, all right, do you think about decisions after you make them?
All the time, obsessively.
I don't ever. Once I make the decision, I'm super confident. I move on, and even if it's a wrong decision, I don't mind. I don't mind making mistakes. I don't wallow on them at all. I just learn from that mistake and move right on. I don't obsess ever. I'll obsess before the decision, but never after. And when I think about places where I'm just not that, Mentor is a great, once I realized that our commercial organization, was rolling up all into me and I'm not the right person, not to train those people, not to hire them. The first thing I did is started to recruit Tama. It took me 2 years, but by the time I was done, it was obvious to me that this was going to be a game changer the day she joins, because all the things that I'm weak at, she was going to be really strong at. And it's amazing how we are very different skill sets, although there's some that we overlap, but we just somehow ride that same wave to the chagrin of a lot of the company, by the way. I'm sure some of them at some point like, God, you two again. But from very different angles, right? She is an unbelievable mentor, unbelievable, great at hiring, identifying good talent, building them, growing them, unbelievable salesperson, unbelievable relationship builder. And I'll just sit and watch that in awe, and knowing that not only am I not those things, I will never be any of those things, but also feeling really awesome that she is those things. And we get to do that together. And it's a privilege for me to get to work with her. And it's not to say I don't obsess about some parts of those business, right? Again, people on my team will tell you that I don't micromanage, but I'll be very acutely aware of small details and I'll ask about them. And I'll also tell them, I'm not here to make that decision. But here's my thoughts. You do whatever you want. Like, I'm not here to make decisions for you. I don't tell people who to hire, who to fire, but I'll have opinions, possibly very strong opinions about very small details sometimes, but that's okay, knowing that I'm not superseding decisions that they're making or the people within the organization are making. And I think that that's probably the right angle for me. You asked where I want to take, my leadership. Hopefully I'll still be the right person to keep doing this. So long as I'm super motivated, so long as that vision that we started with is still the vision that makes sense for the market, then I want to be the one to deliver that, so long as I'm capable. If I am not capable, I have to step aside, not just for my sake, but for the company's sake. And we took on a big enough project for the industry's sake at this point. Like, if we screw this up, like, it's not just Cherre and our employees, like the whole industry is now building on top of us. We have to get this right. And if for whatever reason, I'm not the right person for that, I have to step aside. I hope I'm the right person for a very long time. And I'd like to think that I will be, because of all the things that I just mentioned. But I want to continue to grow myself. We've never built a company, Ben and I, this size. We always sold, before it was this size. And this is the first time we've been able to grow it in the way we have, and first time we wanted to, right? We usually decided at this point, like, hey, the bureaucracy starts. Let's take the money and let somebody else deal with that problem. Great, thank you, money. Here we're like, we want to grow that bureaucracy. We want to build a real company, and I want to continue to grow with that. I'm hoping that I will be able to grow with that and continue to strengthen the places where maybe I'm not strong enough with other people. Because I don't think, yes, I'm always obsessed about self-work, but I also need to be realistic about there's just things that are very hard to change in our 40s. Like, this is who we are at this point. Like, small things, great, but like fundamental changes, not that easy to change at this point. So I need to be able to hire around me in places where I don't think I'm strong enough, but not be afraid to continue to lean into places where I'm strong, where I think I know I have a difference, even if those people that I'm leaning into are also very strong, perhaps even stronger than I am in those places, because they're not going to have that vision. They're not going to have the emotional connection the way I am. And I want to drive that through, even though there might be better technically, as a talent.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. And I'm wondering what's different about this product, this vision, this business. Why is that fire still there in you?
It sounds so like cynical and cliche, but we can change the world. And, you know, things we did with HR data or fun, lucrative financially. No one's going to write a book about it. Just be realistic. If we did a good job here, we're changing the way real estate works forever, right? This is the foundation. If we get this right, the entire industry is going to be built on this for many, many years to come. Houses will be cheaper one day. Commercial transactions will be more seamless, less friction, less cost, right? That's societal differences that are fundamental, right? And those things get me excited.
I think that ties back to something you said early on about delivering value. So how do you think about that when you're working with prospects and with existing customers? How do you get them excited, both about, let's say, the first year of working with Cherre? Here's what you can expect, right? And let's go on this journey together, because 10 years from now, or whatever the time horizon is, right, we're going to be doing more transactions faster and cheaper. The built world environment is going to be so much more sensitive to tenants' needs because we're surfacing those data, we're responding to them. How do you thread that all together?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's not the same for each client and the land, right? I think the overarching, theme is always we want all our data in one place so we can do everything, right? But what they want to do up front, what adds the most amount of value in day one, is not the same per client. Usually it's somewhere around, I want to know, what do I own? Where do I own? How is it performing? That's usually where things land, because there's some type of process within the organization that's doing that, not poorly, but inefficiently, right? Sometimes very poorly, obviously. And usually I just want to be able to answer simple things. And I want to just close my quarter on time for the first time ever, right? It's not a secret that most large asset managers couldn't close a quarter if their life depended on it. Not because they're dumb, not because they're not investing ridiculous money, because it's just really, really hard to do. And, if I'm like a big asset manager that, multi-asset class, multi-strategy, some property managers are submitting things on a weekly, monthly basis, some I have direct access to. The amount of complexity in that process and the likelihood it's going to go wrong is really, really high. No matter what that firm does, even the best of the best, they'll do everything right and they'll just be given wrong data that's hard to find out, right? So usually that's somewhere around that might be the first land, right? It could be, a client that has, 100 property managers they're getting submissions from, and they want to just have that's centralized in one way such that they can now control the data flowing through. In another place, it might be, I want to have my quarterly asset report going out. Like I'm a REIT. I want my quarterly report to go out on time and be more accurate so I don't have to restate it the next quarter. It might be, someone might be a little more sophisticated. I need some type of benchmarking to understand how are we performing, versus NACRE or something, or NAREIT or something like that. So somewhere over there is very often. Another area might be data compliance, meaning I am using data and I want to know if this data is accurate at the end, right? And we always say, our job is to connect data in a repeatable, reliable, consistent, and accurate manner. Every one of those tenets has to be true. But one of the most important ones is accuracy. And accuracy in our industry is actually really, really hard to answer, right? Because the data might look good. And it might even look good from like some programmatic test that might say, yeah, it's within a range.
It's consistent.
Yeah, we've seen this again and again every month. But is it right? I don't know. So for example, let's say net effective square foot in the building has been 1,200 for a long time, and now it's 1,198. You'd say, it's within reason, but why? Should it change? I mean, something, it's not supposed to change. Did we change the calculation? What? So even that little nuance, I keep going back to this net effective square. It's one of those weird, it's a really complicated metric that literally changes across geographies and within portfolios. So it's a good one to use as an example, but things like that are actually really hard to answer. So I think more and more of those examples are probably, where our clients are spending time, kind of data compliance management. And I think today a lot of where clients are spending time is, okay, I want to have some fun models. And that's going to be the more exciting part, I think, in the future.
So how do you think this current wave of technology, and Cherre as a part of that, is really going to reshape, let's say, the way that real estate businesses do business 5-10 years from now? First of all, how quickly are these changes going to happen, knowing what we know about the way the real estate industry works? And then, do you hire different people with different skill sets if everyone's walking around with their own set of 10 agents? Is it a more flat organizational structure? What are these sorts of...
I don't think I'm that smart to answer that question. Sam Altman was asked last year to try and predict like what the next 3 to 5 years look like. And he said, I'm not really sure the end of this year is going to look like. It resonates with me. The pace of change is pretty rapid, and it makes it very, very hard to make predictions now without sounding very, very stupid. So I don't know, first of all. I think it's important to say that. I think engineering teams are getting a lot more productive, and that means that good engineers are getting a lot better because they're able to think about a problem and then just have that's the hard part. Think about, how do I want to solve this problem? But once I figured that out, the coding part's almost like a chore, right? So if I can skip that chore part, good engineers just got really good, right? Bad engineers, well, they always sucked. You just might have not known about it, right? So we can get that out of the way. But good engineers, we get really good. It also means a lot of the burden moves from the engineering organization, I think, to the product organization, because that same skill set of solving problems doesn't have to be an engineering skill set. It could be a product skill set. And then I've seen this phenomena a lot happening where product managers, maybe not, maybe over optimistically, because when you look at the code, it's not as good as they think it is, will just hack things together because they don't want to wait for things to get done, because product managers usually just,
I'm very guilty of this.
Yeah, we just want to see it now. Just show me something. It doesn't have to be just show. So if I can skip from my ideation to some type of MVP very quickly, I get excited about that. I think that's probably one thing we'll see is, the disintermediation of, idea to code, right? We're going to see that happen a lot faster. I think we're also going to see more rapid adoption of automated agent processes, right? So things that just do things for us in our universe. And I think in the real estate world, we're going to see very rapid adoption here. I think we're going to see sorry here. I think we're going to see probably not in the immediate future, but probably maybe a year out from now, as some of these agentic processes get a little better. I think we're going to see kind of the virtual analyst for sure. I think the virtual analyst is going to give us kind of automation of a lot of low-level processes that, we're doing. I think, for example, a lot of stuff that you're doing, the thought of analysts doing that manually in the future seems really unfathomable. And I mean like a year future seems unfathomable to me, right? So anything that's to do with documents, everything that's to do with repeatable processes, which doesn't require a lot of, judgment, I think will all be automated. And I think once that all gets automated, I think we're going to have slightly more efficient markets already, because now I can look at every deal in the market instead of like the 3 that I was looking at. I can do a risk review on all my properties instead of just a handful select, right? I can ask any question I want, about risk, about exposure, about opportunity. I can build strategies and think about how they might affect things. I can do a lot of what if scenarios and, kind of war games with, what if I do something and someone else, I can do all these types of games. So I think we're going to see all that in the near future. What happens after that is a very kind of open world, right? I could take it to like extremely nihilistic place where, if we get AGI sooner, and AGI seems to be uncontrollable, I think, once it's out, you might see like a chaos GPT version of, AGI, and all of a sudden, what does it do? It's going to take over the all electrical sources, right? Power sources. And it might just, give us a matrix world, right? So you can go, it's not unfathomable. That's a reality that could happen, right? Probably not that version of it, or maybe yes, because its imagination is coming from whatever it was already trained on. So we might actually get matrix, even though it doesn't make any sense, because that's what it knows, right? But I think a more realistic scenario is where we get kind of really, really smart, agents that are going to empower us, every step along the way. And I think for our industry, that's going to mean slowly having real estate decisions becoming more and more programmatic. Most of our judgment will be narrowed down to like, well, I used to make this joke, it's okay to argue where Apple stock is going tomorrow. It's just not okay to argue where it was yesterday, right? And that's where we are in real estate. So we're going to have a lot more, because you and I can have different opinions about where Apple, having all the same information, we're going to have different opinions. That's great. That's okay. That's what markets are built on. But once we all have the same information, it's really going to come down to judgment. And then we'll have to ask, whose judgment is better and why? And then can we replace that judgment at some point, I think is another question.
Yeah, what I always say is an investment committee has access to the same data, the same memo, right? They might have deep dive in the same war room. People still vote yes or no. And that could be because, I've seen something like this asset recently. It went really horribly for me. It's emotional. But what is that emotion? That intuition is usually built on experience, right? And so I find that really interesting to unpick, that a lot of people like determinism. They prefer that over being presented with
easy,
something.
Isn't it?
Yeah, so easy, right? But when you look at the types of decisions people make and you start to unpick them, they realize they already work in a probabilistic way. But as someone who sells, a Gen AI native platform, when I rock up to these real estate professionals and I'm like, determinism isn't cool anymore, they're like, whoa, wait a second.
We really like it. Yeah.
You're going to 98.5% confident is the most confident I will ever be about a decision? That's simply impossible.
Yeah. And the fact that they're so confident about their decisions today is also pretty disturbing, right? It should be probably like 20% confidence in their own decisions today. Yeah. I think there's been research on this. The same investment committee isn't consistent within the investment committee over time, right? So if you're given, it's not test, but if you're given the same memo slightly written differently, they're going to make different decisions, even though the actual underlying data is the same. So they're very susceptible to the narrative, right? The story itself is going to decide. So that, it made me think that maybe we should have a agentic process of taking the information, writing the most IC friendly kind of version of it so it gets approved. And you're like, wait a minute, that's a really bad idea, right? So we're essentially taking the same data and we're just taking into account who are the people on the committee. Mm-hmm. And then we'll play to what their past decisions were to make sure that this memo, the data is the same data. So I wonder if maybe we just should stop with the IC memo and just say, well, here's the data raw. Here's, different charts and graphs, and not tell a story. And then let's have that conversation, within the committee and saying, well, why do we really get excited about this asset? It's not going to be the verbiage around it. What is it? What is the data story trying to tell us here? I think it's a good, healthy process because it's not a state. There's a lot of bullshit in the IC committees, right? In investment committees. It's two people who actually matter, and then a lot of people, are talking heads because either they have their voice, either they're not a voting member, but they're there to pretend that they matter in that committee, or they're just kind of some kind of sideshow there that they are voting, but they're going to vote as the boss is going to vote, so they'll vote last, surely, right? And there are very few of these committees where they really foster a good discussion, and the figurehead will vote last after they've heard everyone. Those are very rare because even that figurehead is full of ego and they want the deal done if it's sitting in an IC, right? So they'll start and tell everyone what they think, and then everybody else will kind of fall in line very, very quickly, right? So I think that's a bad practice. Hopefully, if we're able to kind of deconstruct that memo into the data and we have maybe some agents providing some different versions of that story, right? The bear case, the bull case, the counter narrative. And then now we as a committee listen to them and say, well, those are interesting. And instead of us pretending we know that, let's have the best version of that tell us the different versions as if they're members, kind of the BlackRock example you gave. And let's listen. Let's think about, well, now that we've heard the best version, it's not going to get better than that. We're not going to be better than that. But now let's use our judgment as a team to think about which of those 3, 5, 6 narratives that were presented to us seems the most likely given that. And, that's, now that we've made a decision, let's go back to them and say, we've decided to do this. Critique our decision and, where are we missing? Assuming we're going to make this transaction, what should we do to make it better? And I think that's a process that we should see.
Yeah, it's a very technically sophisticated way of having, two people just to argue whether this case should be won by the prosecution or not, right? We all did that sort of exercise growing up. And I like that version of thinking about augmented reasoning. And I think, honestly, we're not that far away from it. And so when I wake up in the morning and I, as you do, decide to continue investing in this business, even though sometimes it feels like pushing a rock uphill and sometimes the boulder is rolling downhill, but it really depends on the day and the momentum. Who wouldn't want to make better decisions?
Yeah, it makes no sense to me.
I know those people exist, but it's hard to think about. Is there one bit of information about yourself or about Cherre that you would like to share with our listeners today before wrapping up?
Ooh. Nothing about me personally. Yes, definitely about Cherre. We're spending a lot of time thinking about how do we start helping clients adopt models, right? So they wanted more kind of, I would say, predictive type models is probably what's most exciting to them. So how do we get to the point where they move from where they are today, where data is connected and being used for, mostly BI type use cases, some kind of benchmarking data science use cases, into really predictive types of use cases, understanding, disposition of assets, which markets they should go into, how should they fund it and things like that. So I think we're spending a lot of time on how do we do that for our clients in the near future. So I think it's the most exciting for us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.